Hello, good morning, everyone. We will wait just a minute more to let other participants join this webinar. So we can start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our second event of CLIMAAX Community of Practice, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Fulvio Bidao from the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and today I'll be moderating this event. I remind you, this is the second meeting of our Community of Practice dedicated to CLIMAAX Toolbox. Uh, prior to moving forward into our webinar, before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Please, first of all, note that this meeting is being recorded. You don't have the chance actually to open your mic or turn on your camera, but the recording will be available later on, so don't worry if you miss something. And we will gather some input from you through Mentimeter at the end of the webinar, so keep your smartphone ready. But you are more than welcome to post your questions in the and comments throughout the webinar through the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So don't be shy. We will try to address all your questions and comments or via this Q&A box or through our speakers and panelists. So this is the agenda for today. Following the welcoming remarks and the introduction to the webinar, we will start with a presentation by Frederick Wetherall from the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts. And Frederick will provide a brief overview of the CLIMAAX Toolbox and its dedicated handbook, and explain how this toolbox can support local climate risk assessment. Next, we will hear two practical presentations from our practitioner from pilot regions in CLIMAAX, showcasing how the toolbox and specific workflows have been used into pilot regions to address different climate risks. First of all, we will have Taina Hanikoski from the Ministry of the Interior in Finland that will share the Finland experience using the workflow for wildfire risk assessment. Afterwards, we will have Dace Zandersone from the Latvian Environment, Geology and Meteorology Center that will present their experience in applying the flood risk assessment workflow in Latvia. So following this presentation, we will host an interactive panel discussion to dive deeper into their experiences. And joining the panel will be Thomas Kuhn from the Finnish Meteorological Institute and Dace Zandersone again from Latvia. And we will conclude with an interactive session that is focused on investment in climate services and risk assessment that will be guided by our colleague Jaroslav Miziak from CMCC. And using Mentimeter, we will gather your input and feedback on various aspects of this topic. And these insights will help us also guide our future activities. So we are trying to plan the activities of the community of practice based on your feedback on interests, priorities, and needs. So we will close the meeting at noon with a few closing remarks, also with some updates and upcoming events for the community of practice. But before diving into this webinar, a quick reminder about CLIMAAX Community of Practice, what it is, and what is its mission. So the Community of Practice in CLIMAAX is intended as a space for collaboration and knowledge exchange between different kinds of practitioner, experts, and stakeholders across European regions and sectors that share a common interest in climate risk assessment, with the aim to foster learning, but also co-design improve the climate risk assessment practice at the local and regional levels through a series of events and activities that we are designing to support the members of the community, and that should be tailored to your needs. So joining this community will mean having the chance to share insights and learn directly from the experience of fellow practitioners, such as today with our pilot regions practitioners, but also receive advice from a network of peers and contribute to shape the CLIMAAX activities and outcomes. So by contributing also to the refinement of its framework and to also the main outcomes of the project. Beyond that, the community of practice will offer the opportunity to connect and engage with regions, so to leverage their experience of success, but also challenges, and collaborate with peers in different areas of shared interest, and also join webinars, of course, workshops and events that are organized throughout the CLIMAAX project. So as many of you know, we recently had a kickoff meeting to expand this community and engage all interested practitioners. However, our journey began well before that with activities that have helped shape our approach. We undertake a survey to capture the state of the art on climate risk assessment practices across various regions in Europe, consultation with pilot regions and experts to refine the outcomes and ensure they are usable and flexible, and a series of thematic webinars and workshops, first of all with pilot regions to share and discuss the application of the framework and the preliminary results from pilots, but also a series of content and technical sessions, including the CLIMAAX digital handbook to explain the main elements of the assessment framework and the available workflow, all of which are available on YouTube for those who may want to catch up with these contents. But this is also the case during the Community of Practice kickoff that we held in November, where we introduced the Community of Practice, the Climate Risk Assessment Framework, and gathered your input and preference as well as expectation and needs. And these insights are guiding our activity planning, as I said, to align the activities to your priority. And with today's webinar, we aim to respond to that input by focusing on the practical application of CRA or climate risk assessment tools and methodologies, showcasing real world example and application to foster discussion that support your work on climate risk assessment. So without further ado, we'll now dive into the theme of this webinar, which is climate risk assessment with the CLIMAAX Toolbox. So just let me introduce our speaker and panelists for today. First of all, we will have Frederick Federal, who is a senior scientist at the ECWMF, and he has a PhD in hydrology and I've worked 20 years with assessing and forecasting natural hazards and risks with a main focus on flooding, and is coordinating the ECWMF contribution to European project focusing on topics that range from machine learning for flood and fire modeling, forecast to development of impact modeling of natural hazards. We have also Dace Dandersone, who is a data analyst and climatologist with a background in mathematics and statistics, and she is currently leading a team of climate data researcher at the Latvian Environment, Geology and Meteorology Center. We have Taina Anikoski, who is a senior specialist at the Ministry of the Interior in Finland, and she oversees EU-funded projects focusing on climate risk assessment, as well artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analysis for decision-making in a disaster. She's also a doctoral researcher at the University of Tampere, focused on Arctic region. And finally, we have Thomas Kuhn, senior researcher at the Finnish Meteorological Institute and head of the group Climate Change and Future Cities. He is an expert in climate modeling and model development. So I will say that we can now start with Frederick with the overview of CLIMAAX Toolbox and its handbooks. So Frederick, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. A second, I'm just going to share presentation. Do you see now the slideshow?
Yeah,
No.
can you put them in presentation mode, please?
I'm trying to, yes.
Great. We're good to start.
All right. So yes. Thank you very much. We'll give you a very short introduction to the handbook, which is what we call our online tool now. And apologies for those who've seen this before. I'm sure that you're quite aware with the ones we're doing, the tools we have so far, but just run you through so we give a setup for the coming explanations of how this applied. So what I will talk about now is an overview of the handbook and also show a bit of where this sits on our GitHub repositories. And the handbook consists of the framework and the workflows. Those are the main things in there, but we also have support functions. We have the service desk, we have forums, and we have also questions you can ask through the GitHub repositories. And we have the Jupyter Hub, which is our online computing tool for the regions who are in the project. And also a bit about how we do the handbook updates, because this is an evolving product, and it will be with your help that we will shape it in the future. So that's very nice to see that this is a collaborative effort. We have put out now a first version of it, and we hope that you will give us a lot of feedback on it and a lot of suggestions how to improve it, so that you can also see it evolving over the lifetime of the project. So a quick tour of the handbook. It's an online tool at the moment. As you can see here, this is the link to the handbook if you haven't seen it before. And it consists of mainly of a framework, which is a step-by-step guide to how to do the climate risk assessment. And linked to that are the risk workflows, and they are grouped by hazard. And you can see here the main ones are the river, coastal floods, heavy rainfall, heat waves, droughts, fire, snow, and wind. And in this handbook, we also gathered resources which help you to, we have technical documentation and supporting content as well. So just starting with the framework, you've probably seen this before already in other, but just to let you know that we have the videos to help you go through the steps of the framework. We also have guiding questions that will put you on the way, and also supporting information if you want to read more about these things. And then the steps in this one is what everybody has to go through to do the climate risk assessment. There's the scoping, or the exploring, the analysis, assessment, and evaluation. So this will be the main tool you're going to use for the climate risk assessment, and then the workflows will help you in the analysis and the risk assessment as well. And of course, in the first step, you will do more of a general analysis, and then in the second phase of the project, you will be able to go more into detail. But I'm not going to cover that in this talk. I will just show a little bit on a quick overview of the handbook. So the workflows, they are static representations of Jupyter notebooks, and so they are guided code for you to help you to run through these workflows. And they are all on GitHub, so you can download them there, or you can also go to the Jupyter Hub to run the notebooks as well. And the data from these ones, so they are from various sources. We have tried to really use the existing sources in Europe, which is one of the main things is the Copernicus Climate Data Store, which have a lot of information about the climate data and the hazard data. We also have the JRC Risk Data Hub, which contains a lot of the exposure and vulnerability data that you will be using as well. And we have the CLIMAAX cloud storage for other types of data that we have that not a part of these ones. And other resources as well. We are using mostly what is online already available. Now, if you go into these ones, you will find that they are organized in the GitHub repositories, and you will be able to use the code there. You can download it and you clone these repositories. And if you want to look at the notebooks, it's better to look at them in the online handbook, but you will also see that they are available here if you go to the GitHub, so you can see what they look like and how to run through them. So this is a resource that you will be using when you're applying the workflows. And we try to give as much information as possible and resources to help you run these ones. So they are distributed via GitHub. They're all based on Python. And then they are in formal Jupyter notebooks. So what you need to do to run these is a Jupyter server that can launch these. and the Git to obtain the notebooks, or you can also download them from the GitHub website if you want to, if you don't want to use Git. But we strongly recommend that you use Git when you're working on these things. And you also need to access, use a user account to access some of the data retrievers as well. And you will see later on examples of these workflows. Now, if you go to the supporting resources you have, we try to have example answers for guiding questions as well. This is part of the handbook. We have a glossary and the frequently asked questions, and these are under development, I would say. We have started to develop the frequently asked questions, but since the regions have just started working with these things, we have not so many questions yet, but we will soon launch the FAQ. We have dashboards and explorers for you to look at as well, and links to software docs. We also have dataset documentation and also information on how to access the support functions here as well. And we also have a lot of videos online now. They have been recently added, and not all of the workflows have these videos, but they are being put up there for you to look through, and they are showing exactly what is written already in documentation, but the videos are a visual guide to help you to run through this. Also, both on the workflows and also for the framework. The first point of contact you will get if you do have some issues, some problems, is to use the handbook resources. We have the service desk, which would be for the regions, and there's a single channel for contact with CLIMAAX experts. We use a ticketing system, which means that you log a question and we can see who you are and how to best answer these questions. But we also have other resources. We have the GitHub and the forum, the Easily Web forum, and they are public resources. You can ask questions there as well, and they will be publicly available. And you can also use the Jupyter Hub if you have something related to computing resources. And something that we have also been running for a while now are these drop-in sessions. So every Friday, 11 to 12 Central European time, we run a session on Teams. And this is can be anything. We have had so far some workflow demonstrations as examples of this sessions. But it's also a chance for you to bring up questions and problems, ask for more information about workflows, but also share progress and tips as well. So this is, I think, is a very valuable resource for the community of practice as well to use this, because it's a chance to lower the barrier between different regions and also the developers and the experts and the practitioners. So really to come to a forum every Friday just to have a chat about common problems or common issues, but also to share information about how you have done, or maybe you have some brilliant ideas that you want to bring up as well. So it's really an open forum for everybody to showcase problems or progress. We will also have, since this is an evolving document, an evolving resource, we will have updates, and you're part of the process, because if you have issues or problems or suggestions, we will update everything in the handbook. And we will release this also. So you will have versions declared as needed, and you'll have release notes with them to see what has been updated. And they will be mentioned also in the drop-in sessions, these recent updates, to explain a bit as well. It's a way for us to get information out. But you need to watch the repositories to get these notifications, and you can see then what has been done. So if you work in a specific workflow, you'll understand that there's maybe an updated version of that specific workflow. So keep an eye out for the updates as well. And it's really your responsibility to update your own workflow copies. I have to say that, because it's something that you will have to take care of when you're working with the workflows. So that was a very, very quick run through of the handbook and the workflows. So I will stop there, and any questions, otherwise I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick. I think it's a very quick but very useful overview of the handbook. And also, thank you for stressing your point about the drop-in sessions and also that continuous feedback and update of the handbook and the workflow is, let's say, planned. So I remind all of you that we have the Q&A box. Okay, there is already a question, but it was covered when will be the next drop-in session anyway. And
Yes, there are. We will have this Friday, and then the week after we will not have it because it's in the holidays. But we will start again with the sessions straight after in January. I will post a link to the chat. We've decided to have this as a link rather than sending out an invitation, but we can also change that in the future. But I'll post a link here in the chat, and hopefully that will work for you to join.
thank you very
Linking to Teams is not always very convenient, beautiful, but that's how we have chosen to do it this way. Hold on a second, I will.
Thank you very much. Also, because we have another question about how can we join the drop-in session, and you are already answering that question. So I remind you that we will try to address all the questions and comments throughout this webinar. But I think that for now, Frederick, you provided a very nice overview of the handbook and invite everyone to participate in these drop-in sessions. We can now move forward with the practical application of some workflows. So the presentation from Taina Anikoski from the Ministry of Interior in Finland that will share their experience using their workflow for fire risk assessment. Taina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fulvio. I will share my screen. And then presentation mode.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So hi, everyone. Really nice to be here today. My name is Taina from the Ministry of Interior in Finland. I work at the Rescue Department. And I'm just really briefly going to go through what we have done with the fire risk assessment and where we are at the moment with our analysis and risk assessment. So firstly, just briefly what the Finnish pilot was focusing on. So our aim was to focus on the forest or the wildfire risk. And we were very interested in how that risk will change in the future and using the CLIMAAX Toolbox in that sense. And we were particularly interested in two sort of stakeholder groups. We wanted to see what this risk change would mean in the future for rescue services and civil protection authorities, and then also forest management or forest owners as a second group. So what kind of consequences would they have with the changing forest fire risk? And we wanted to focus on two regions in Finland. Finland is a quite long country and very diverse. So we chose two different kind of regions. We chose Southwest Finland and then North Karelia, and you can see them here situated in the map of Finland. It's not a good map because there's no north arrow and scale, but you will get the idea where they are located, and that's the main point. We chose these two regions because they are quite different. Southwest Finland is very much more populated than North Karelia and has urban settlements, whereas the North Karelian area is very much heavily forested. There's a lot of forest there, and there are also a lot of parks and natural areas where we would have a lot of visitors, tourists, and different kinds of groups of people, even though there wouldn't be necessarily population living there, but still it would be very much affected with the people there. And for the actual hazard or risk analysis, the risk analysis is based on the fire weather index, the Canadian one, based on meteorological model parameters. In Finland, we have our own wildfire risk index as well, but we use this one because this is available in the toolbox, and we were also able to sort of translate the different values between the two indexes without any sort of issues. So then we established this fire weather index threshold, which would be relatable for us and for our purposes. And then those days which exceed this threshold are called fire weather days, or FWDs. And here you can see some analysis we've done in the Southwest Finland region in Finland. And we see that there is an increase in these fire weather days, especially during the springtime. You can see that on the left in the picture, which we can interpret means that the fire season length would increase and it would start earlier than it does today. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a risk without exposure and vulnerability. So then for these, we used different ranges of indicators. We were particularly interested in people living in wild and urban interface, and then also the population density, especially in the Southwest Finland region. And then we took those into consideration. And calculated these risks as a combination. And you can see here on the left some maps with on the top we have the people living in wild and urban interface percentage, and then we have the population density in the middle, and then this seasonal fire weather index in the bottom. So based on this, we can sort of then see these areas of highest or lowest risk, or higher and lower risk by using this tool. I won't go into the technical side of this analysis now because the time is very limited, and I think that will be discussed also in the panel. And Thomas from the Finnish Meteorological Institute will be there to answer any of those questions if you have. But then I wanted to also give few thoughts about the actual sort of analysis process and what we have noticed, and then about the interpretation of results, because if and when you are using the toolbox, this is also something that you will need to think about eventually, if not now. One thing is that we sort of need to be quite sort of critical in a positive way when we think about and do like a review of the results. So we have to really think about what we can actually say for certain, and where do we need to find more information. It's really easy to just say something that this means now this, but we need to have this kind of solid base and justification for the statements that we are going to make based on the results. For example, now that we know that the fire weather season will start earlier in the spring in Southwest Finland, this is what we can say, that it indicates that there is a chance that the forest fires will be earlier than before, but we cannot say that they will, of course, every year be exactly earlier, and that there will be a lot of forest fires in the early spring in the future. So we really need to think about what do we actually want to say and what it then means. And visualization of the results, I think, is the key, because potentially there is a lot of information in the sort of end result map or graph, and to make it very or as usable as possible and very lucrative for the end user and target groups, I think that's very important. And maybe we also have to think about this kind of visualization by target group. So maybe something that's interesting, for example, for the fire and rescue services might not be as interesting for the forest management or forest owners in Finland. If we think about our case and our pilot, but then we have to think about how to interpret the language, interpret the results to the language of the target group and how they can make the most of it. And also, I think it's really important that we think about the product with that, the end product, and how it looks like, so that it can be interpreted clearly and in a singular way, so that there's no questioning about, does this mean this or does this mean that, or what does it mean. So I think this is something that we are now still working on, and how to present this and how to actually translate the results and the risks then to the usage of the target groups and end users, so that they can actually use this information that we have gotten from the CLIMAAX Toolbox. And then I think it's also important to keep in mind that this is not just a one-time thing. So now that we are doing this analysis, it gives us very good information and information that also what we need to do in the future. And we are hoping that we are able to incorporate this toolbox and this tool to our own systems, and then we could use it also in the future and update the results, because of course we get more information, and when other regions are using this, we get more tips and clues how to use it, and what could we look at, and what would be useful and what would not be useful. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that this is a process, maybe a marathon instead of a sprint. And I'm hoping that by the end of the project, this tool would be so good that we could, for example, in Finland, take it into consideration when we are doing our regional risk assessment processes, or even the national risk assessment that we do. Hopefully that's the end game, and I hope we get there. But these were just some of my thoughts about the Finnish pilot, and I want to thank you for your attention. Kiitos paljon. And over to you, Fulvio.
Thank you very much, Taina. I really appreciate you telling us your experience in using the fire risk workflow, but also offering some insights and, let's say, piece of advice about the usability of the technical outputs, not only in terms of internal processes for your institution, but also in terms of communicating and engaging different kind of groups in understanding and making use of these outputs for climate risk management. So thank you very much. And we can now move forward to Dace Zandersone from the Latvian Environment Geology and Meteorology Center that should present the application of the flood risk assessment workflow in Latvia. Dace, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Now I will try to share my presentation. And I guess you can see my screen and my presentation, right?
Yeah, right.
Awesome. So yeah, my name is Dace Zandersone, and I'm from Latvia, from Latvian Meteo Center, where I'm working as a climate group team lead. So under me, there are a group of people who are mainly working with the past climate change and future climate change predictions and so on. So we are mainly like a technical people. And right now, all of this project is very difficult for us, actually, if we're talking especially about the framework part, because I have heard that most of the regions are struggling with the toolbox and the technical things. So we are quite opposite. For us, the framework is the tricky one, and that's why, while working in this project, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here and to understand how all of this goes together, because usually we were more like people who are giving some kind of data, like analyzing the data, seeing trends and so on. But right now we see where the data actually goes to and how to speak about the interpretations and so on. So yeah, this presentation will be mainly of course, about the flood risks, but it is very important to see how all of this interacts together. So first of all, there is this framework, which is, as I mentioned, the tricky part for us. I think you have seen this this circle before already, but yeah, there are quite a lot of questions that has to be asked before you start to do the risk analysis, because mainly people think that you can just go into the toolbox, jump into some kind of workflow and just work with it. But actually you need to start with the scoping. You need to really understand what is the problem, what is the situation right now, and then move forward. So in our case, in Latvia, we are dealing and working right now with the flood risks, and especially with the coastal floods, because we have more than 500 kilometers long coastline, and it is loosey, sandy sediments, and those sediments are quite vulnerable to coastal erosion. And if we're looking at the predictions of the climate scenarios, and we see that the sea level will rise in the future and it will intensify the erosion processes. That's why this is so important for us. And this is like a scoping phase, some part of the scoping where we already understand the situation, what is happening right now. And then we go to the risk exploration. But of course, yeah, this presentation won't be about the workflow, but the main idea is that you have to see the whole picture. You cannot just jump into the toolbox. But at the end of the risk exploration, there is this phase where you have to go into the toolbox part and see what kind of workflows are there. And for the floods, there are two different workflows. One is for the river floods, another is for the coastal floods. And both of these workflows gives hazard assessment for retrieving flood maps and risk assessment for mapping potential damage. And for coastal floods, there's also coastal water levels. An important thing is to understand that in those workflows, there are data, the results are based on the global data sets. So at some points, you need to add your own knowledge, you need to add your own data, you need to communicate with different institutions to get the data. So it is like these results can give you first impressions in which direction to go to, but you will need your local knowledge, your local data to improve the results. But the scripts are perfect, and yeah, so I will show you some results, what you can get out of the toolbox. But first of all, about the sea level rise, this graph is not out of the toolbox. This is made in our in-house. So there are past data from our Meteo Center, the station observations, how sea level has risen till nowadays. So there isn't a trend or something like that. But if we're looking at future predictions, then we see that in the middle of the century, there will be quite fast increase of the sea level rise near Latvia. So this is the thing that we see that we need to start to think about coastal erosion and coastal processes right now, because when the middle of the century comes, it will be a bit too late to start thinking about it and to start actually doing some things to make to stop that huge damage that might happen. But yeah, so here are the maps and graphics that can come out from the toolbox. So these are the coastal flooded potential under extreme sea water level scenarios near Riga. So in the first line, you see nowadays climate, and on the second line, there is the future climate. And then there are three different return periods, one in 2 years, one in 50 years, and one in 100 years. And yeah, these kind of maps, they are very easily to get out of the toolbox. And these are the first things what you can see actually. And in our case, yeah, when we are running and we see that, of course, in Latvia, we do have coastal erosion, but there are some parts, of course, of accumulation as well. But as erosion accelerates and natural barriers weaken, coastal areas become more vulnerable, and also the sea level rise is making a huge impact and will make a huge impact to our coastlines. Yeah. And the next thing what we can get out of the toolbox are land cover data, and it is very important data as well. So there are Luisa land cover data in the toolbox, and here we can see that the Baltic Sea coast in Latvia has several characteristic features. Mainly there are loose gravel deposits like sand, and they are relatively low and flat, both above and underwater. But there are many places where are quite a lot of different characteristics, such as rocks and steep bands, and then there are places where grass grows into the sea, and of course, each of the places behaves differently, and when the sea level will start to increase very fast, then they will behave even more differently than nowadays. And when we are putting these data together in the toolbox, you can also make the damage curves, because all of this can make a huge damage, and storm surges drive the long-term coastal changes, and they can be significant hazards in their own right. That's why it is important to think about storm surges as well if we're talking about coastal erosion and coastal processes. And in the past, we have several events that had already caused quite a lot of damage. For example, in 2005 in Riga, there was a situation, an event where we lost millions of dollars because of the storm surge. And in our case, it's not just because of the Baltic Sea, but also because through the Riga flows one of the biggest, actually the largest river in Latvia, River Daugava. And another thing is that in Riga we have many canals. And when this storm surges come, then of course all of this sums together and makes a lot of damage. And of course, if we can make these kind of damage curves, then we can also make maps with the damages. And this is also, these kind of results comes out from the workflow. So here are results. Again, the first line shows the past climate, nowadays climate, and the second line shows the future, and 3 different return periods. And yeah, this is something that you can get out of the toolbox, but here it is very important to understand that the damage is like an average damage for the whole Europe. And if you want to improve these kind of results, then you need your local data from, for example, insurance companies or other data from other institutions, so you can add your own historical events and their damage. And of course, it could improve all of the result. And through this process, we also looked at the river floods, because, as I mentioned, we have the large river Daugava, but we have many other big rivers in Latvia, and especially last few years, they're giving quite a lot of damage to us, especially because of the spring floods that are happening nowadays in the January, for example, like last year. And that's why it is important to look also at the river floods. Here are 3 maps that came out of the toolbox for the river floods. Of course, yeah, they are covering whole Latvia, and if we're looking at them right now, it is not that obvious to see any kind of results. But the good thing is that we can zoom in, and here are maps which are zoomed in. These maps are not made in the CLIMAAX Toolbox, but the good thing is, and what I want to highlight is that you can get the results and download the results and make any kind of graphs you want. And these, for example, the graph A is our local knowledge data, and based on local data here, and the B is from the CLIMAAX Toolbox. Just we downloaded the results and added them into the GIS systems, and we got these kind of maps. Actually, these 2 results are from the past climate, and they are a return period, the same return period, but there are differences. First of all, that the time series are in a different scale, different one is longer than the other one. And another thing is that for the CLIMAAX, there are global data. And in our case, we are cropping out, for example, the rivers. But in the CLIMAAX, of course, they are not cropping out exactly where the river is. And then there are dam models different and so on. But our main idea is how we are looking at the CLIMAAX data is that we can run the scripts and see the global results, what can give us data from the global data sets, and we see which places to look at closer, and afterwards we can highlight those places, and at those places look at some kind of not extremes, but look at the specifically those places and see local data, had some local knowledge, and so on. That is quite a tricky part at some points, and how to do the interpretation, as I mentioned also in the previous presentation. It is very important to think sometimes a bit critical, but yeah. And afterwards, this was like a risk analysis part, and then you have to move forward and do the key risk assessment, and monitoring and evaluation, and again scoping, because this is like a never-ending circle, and you have to keep repeating all of the steps, because very often, especially doing actually risk analysis part, you understand that you need some more data, you need some more knowledge, and you need to talk with some kind of stakeholders, with people who have some kind of other data, and at some points you just understand that you don't have any local data, and you have to start the monitoring process. And I think it's okay to do that, but it is very nice to see that you have to do that. So this circle, it really is like a never-ending circle, but each time it improves more and more, and the results are getting better and more understandable for us like users, but also for stakeholders and policymakers and so on. So this was a quick tour to things what we are working with, how we are dealing with the toolbox. I hope this gives you some kind of short introduction of what kind of results you can get out of the toolbox, because all of this is very, very, very nice and very useful for us, and I think it will be useful for many people out there.
Thanks a lot. That you provide a very nice tour about your overall experience, and also combining different key outcomes of CLIMAAX, the climate risk assessment frameworks, and the hazard workflows. So it is very valuable for our audience, I think. I think that right now we can move on to the interactive panel discussion. I can see that we have a very active Q&A box where also our speakers are interacting with the audience. So please just remind that we are going to address the different questions and comments you have also in this panel discussion. So joining the panel today will be Thomas Kuhn from the Finnish Meteorological Institute, and again, Dace from the Latvian Environment, Geology and Meteorology Center, and my colleague from CMCC, Gloria Mozzi, who will moderate with me the discussion. So before, I think that Gloria, for now, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Fulvio. For the first question, I would like to ask to Dace, because during your presentation you mentioned that for you the toolbox actually was more friendly because of your expertise rather than the framework. And I think for our audience, the majority, it's I think people that are not so comfortable with the toolbox. So I would like to ask you what are the competences, the expertise that your team needed in order to perform and apply the toolbox for climate risk assessment, and also how was the collaboration with the local and regional authorities and the technical team established. So this let's say interdisciplinarity work came into practice?
Yes, it's true that for us the toolbox part is the easy one because our team in our team there are mainly experts from the with the background in programming, in mathematics and climatology. That's why it was a bit easier for us because we can read the scripts, we understand the scripts, and also we understand the data. Like we see the global data sets and we already know what is ERA5, for example. But I can guess that there are quite a lot of people who don't have the knowledge about climatology and they don't know these kind of data sets, and that's why sometimes it is a bit tricky to understand what is climate normal or how to work with scenarios because yeah, we do know what are climate change scenarios and we do know how to work with them, but yeah, the tricky part is how to communicate them further and how to give the results further to our stakeholders, to policymakers. But it improves in Latvia that while we're working with this project, we also communicate with our ministry. Recently, we have a new ministry, Climate and Energy Ministry, and we see that their knowledge is growing as well, together with ours, and they are helping us to do other parts of the framework. As I showed in my presentation, there are many parts, and thanks to the project, they also gave us quite a lot of questions that should be answered while working with the framework, and those questions helped us to go to the right direction. And sometimes, yeah, we go to the ministry and ask those questions. We go to the stakeholders and many different institutions, and we ask those questions so we can move forward and we can do the analysis part because, yeah, we do have the programmers, people with skills in mathematics, with climatology, but the other skills, yeah, ministry are helping us, and we are also trying to do our best, but it improves more and more.
Yeah, thank you. This constant dialogue with all the different stakeholders is extremely important. Thank you for your point of view.
Thank you. That's so we are talking mostly about the integration or combination of different knowledge systems, but also different data systems. I would like to direct a question to Thomas about how in this process you incorporate local data into your analysis, because something was showed by data, for example, and which types of local data were most critical to your assessment? For example, geospatial, historical, or socioeconomic for vulnerability?
Yeah, so that's actually a tricky question. There's well, first of all, there's some things that you can't really get as data per se. So when we got the workflow, it already worked with the fire weather index and the additional data from a service that is called EFIS. So there's a lot of this vulnerability type of data. But the workflow was setting certain thresholds for what is a critical fire weather index, for example. So what is a critical, say, dryness index on when we are worried? And there's a lot of discussion then, of course, with the local partners and which is based a lot also on experience, how to set these and then adjust your workflow to your local needs. But on top of that, we have, for example, had from another project that was not our project, we got data about what do you call this? The burnability, say, of the forest. So the danger, like if a fire starts in a certain place, how fast would it, for example, spread? So on top of the danger that you have a higher fire weather index, also the fuel that you burn. So what kind of trees are there? What is the topography? And the other project has based on that already provided us with the indicators which are really useful for us. And then I also have to say that the EFIS data that we used is already quite precise, so it's also very useful.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for your precise answer. I think we now can have another question to you, Thomas, about what approach did you use to select the climate scenario for your assessment and to deal with models and scenario uncertainty? Were there particular models or scenarios
Yeah, sorry, just go ahead.
that prove more useful or relevant to your region?
Yeah, well, now I have to be totally honest with you. The workflow as such is based on a pre-calculated indicator, which you can download from the CDS, so from the Climate Data Store. And that pre-calculated index, this fire weather index, is only pre-calculated for 5 models. No, sorry, for 6 models. So we have to also be careful here. So there's the scenarios, which are the emission scenarios where we look at different RCPs or SSPs. And then there's the models themselves, the different model runs. And for the scenario, we chose RCP 4.5 because we thought that would be like a immediate and still relatively optimistic scenario. But then there's only 6 models for which the fire weather index has been calculated, and because it's not very much in our view, we just took all of them. But we have had a big discussion now with inside the CLIMAAX community that we actually want to provide still the regions with an evaluation guidelines and probably even some kind of code to pre-select these scenarios. But we have to a little bit think about this because you can't directly use the indicator to evaluate your model. You have to go back to the actual parameters in the model. And yeah, this is still in discussion. So yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. I have then another question for Date, but I mean, it's open the floor to you as well, of course. We were curious about what were the main challenges in performing climate risk assessment, and if you have any recommendation that you found really useful that maybe you didn't thought at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, for us, it was mainly at the beginning, it was about how to understand the process, because yeah, you really can jump into the risk analysis part and just do the risk analysis, but it is important to understand the whole circle of it. And at that point, Thomas was the first one who helped me, and then came other colleagues from different institutions which are here in CLIMAAX. They gave us like guiding questions, and those guiding questions lead us to other questions and other questions and other questions, and there are still quite a lot of questions that have to be answered, but those are getting more deeper, I would say. And yeah, it is very important to not be scared at the first, because there will be a lot of questions and you will not be able to answer to all of them, but it is okay. At least that was our main thing, to just keep moving forward. And if you understand that there is nothing that you can answer, like no question can be answered, then maybe try to communicate and try to look for other questions that can lead you to these questions and help you to answer these questions. It is, yeah, a bit tricky. I don't know whether you understand what I'm trying to say, but yeah, the first thing is don't be scared, because there will be a lot of things that you will not be able to understand maybe at first in the framework, in the toolbox as well, because yeah, those things that Thomas mentioned, that it is sometimes very tricky to understand what models to use, what scenarios to use, and there might be nobody to answer these questions, because at some point you need your local knowledge. You need to see whether these models works for your region, because for other regions maybe they work very good, but for your region it is a bit different. So yeah, there will be a lot of questions, but it will be okay, I can say from my perspective.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Like, this is really important. I mean, you also, Tana was mentioning it in her presentation. It's really important to have this critical mindset that it's okay that there are certain points that are left unknown, and it's really important to be critical about it, knowing it, and have a clear discussion about it also with the other stakeholders. Thomas, you want to add something, integrate? Like, do you have particular challenges you found or recommendations that you would think of for the, if it comes to you, to your mind?
Yeah, so from all the experience that I have gotten so far, one important piece is I think that you should start the dialogue early. Just like Datsu said, you probably don't know, so you should not be shy to ask. But also, if you for example, like us in Finland, there was 3 institutes working on the risk assessment, and the communication is really key because different people and from different areas have very different perception of things, and then the expectations and the technical possibilities also have to be, you know, somehow converging to each other. So it was really important for us to discuss a lot about the workflow, what the people want to get out, and what we can actually provide through the workflow right now.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a question in the chat. So one thing is for technical people, we will type the answer. And regarding the announcement of the cascading fund, I think it's a good, important question that can interest many in our audience. I believe that the results are almost ready. So I think you will soon hear from the project coordinators regarding the outcomes of it. And Fulvio, I pass the floor to you again.
Thank you, Gloria. There is a question from the audience. I don't know if someone like Christopher or Frederick would like to answer, because someone asked, I may have missed the webinar because I was late. We use SRIDGE system on the GIS side. We will do all our analysis with this system. The question I want to ask is, should we provide your web map services as open source or using Esri systems? Maybe Frederick could answer this question, or otherwise.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think I can answer the question in the chat, but and I don't think I fully understand the question either.
Okay, maybe
Christopher wants to add something to it, but we can have a discussion of that maybe on Friday or in a private call as well.
Okay, great. So we are going to paste again the link for the drop-in session on Friday, just in case. I think that for now we can move forward with our agenda. Let me share my screen. So we can now move on to the last part of this webinar, which is the interactive session focused on investment in climate services and risk assessment that will be guided by our colleague from CMCC, Jaroslav Miziak. We will use Mentimeter to gather your input and feedback on different aspects of this topic, so your insights will help guide our future activities. Before moving to that, I just forgot to thanks again our speakers and panelists for their availability and for sharing their experiences and reflection and pieces of advice. This community, of course, is open, and we will be constantly promoting this kind of discussion, hopefully with more interaction in the upcoming future. But just to move forward, Yaro, thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fulvio, and thank you very much to all the previous speakers. I think the discussion was really interesting and highly beneficial for all the participants. And with the same spirit, we would like to continue in the last part of this webinar. What we are trying to do, we are trying to learn a little bit more about how you are using climate risk, how you are designing the climate risk, and how you are opening the processes that leads you to developing climate services into an ecosystem of downstream services. And this is beneficial for the project, it's beneficial for you, but especially it's beneficial for designing the content of this community of practice in order to deliver the content that you are most interested in, or for which you need the support and backup. I think Days mentioned that it's not just about conducting the risk assessment. It's really creating enabling conditions and spreading the word, developing the data spaces, making sure the data collection is really pertinent to your adaptation strategies, and then you expand all these area to other users that they can build their own risk assessment on the same basis and feed back to you the result and give you the feedback. So all this is very interesting, very complex, and it's also evolving. Dave mentioned that, right? The framework is a never-ending cycle. So with this exercise, we would like to learn a little bit more about how you plan to use the resources, how you already deploy resources in order to invest into climate risk assessment, and how those activities might spill over to developing a conducive environment for climate services. So basically, we are preparing a co-designing in this session a sort of a survey. And this survey will touch upon 4 areas. So the current practices about risk assessment methods and use of climate services, your familiarity with climate services, and also the activities that you are conducting in order to make those services available. The second area is investment strategies. So what kind of funding sources, which might come from cascading funds from the CLIMAAX, which might come from other sources, how you are using them, how you prioritize investment into certain areas that are important for this purpose, and what kind of investment you do. The third area that we would like to check with you are the challenges and barriers. So many of those have been mentioned, the technical expertise, but also the capacity to raise the funds and so on. So all these we are interested in, and we will touch upon that also from your perspective, as well as the future priorities and needs that you have. And this insight from this block of question will feed back into designing the activities in the community of practice. We are not going through all the questions, so we have one slide for every block of these questions. And what we would like to do in the first place is I will expose to you certain type of questions, and we'll pose 2 questions afterwards. And the first question would be, how competent do you feel about answering those questions? Are similar question easy for you to answer? Is it a matter of somebody else, and so on? So we are just trying to gather the feedback about how comfortable are you in answering those questions. And the second part is to what extent that the topics that we are asking about are relevant for this community of practice. Should we invest more into providing more detailed guidance or shared best practice examples and so on? So this is the purpose of this. This is a preparatory meeting. Next time in January, we will go through the survey in detail. But this is just to alert you to the topics and get your initial feedback, how easy it is. Next slide, please. So the first block of question that we would like to ask is to help us to understand the existing risk assessment practices, and also to what extent those practices spill over to developing climate services. Now, climate services might be new to you. Probably is a quite difficult concept to address. For that purpose, I pick up this slide on the right side from Chris and Roger's paper in 2021. And at first, I would like to ask you to concentrate on the upper panel in the figure. So basically, the climate information requires a number of different activities, like observing climate, making sure that the observational data are quality assured, and so on. But using the observed data in order to reconstruct the climate, using the reanalysis, producing reanalysis product as ECMWF and Copernicus Climate Service is already doing. Then operational forecast that might be for the early warning system. It might be also for more strategic purposes, forecasting or projecting the climate into the future. Then the data is needs to be adapted, needs to be downscaled, needs to be translated into tangible indicator indices that explain the impact and so on for specific purposes and sectors. And building upon that, there are other specialized entities that develop climate services that take the risk information and make clear what that risk means for you in agriculture, in critical infrastructure design, and so on. So this is in short what we call value chain behind the climate data information, or as the data is transformed into information and eventually into knowledge. So in the block of question asking you about these type of activities in your context, you'd like to learn more about whether your organization is conducting or commissioning regular risk assessment. You might come from different governance level, local, regional. So we are interested in learning what you do in order to conduct this risk assessment, or whether you are commissioning a similar risk assessment. And in that case, to whom you are commissioning this, and also how frequently do you commission or do you conduct this risk assessment, and so on. Then the second category of question we would ask in the survey is about whether you are using or actively developing customized weather and climate data, and that would refer to specific needs and challenges. And finally, whether you, if you come from subnational government, actively support creating conditions for developing and using climate information. So this is the block of questions. The question in the survey will not be like this. It's really the type of category of questions. And with the next slide, we would like to ask you the question that I anticipated, right? The first question, and that for that purpose, I kindly ask you to open the Mentimeter survey, and it's you might go to www.menti.com and then enter the code 86158517, or you might screen the QR code with your cell phone and get to the two questions regarding these type of questions. So if we go to the next slide, right, that would be the starting the Mentimeter. So the first question that I anticipated, how familiar are you with these type of questions? And that means how confident do you feel you can answer similar questions, and whether there are some technical expertise or technical background information that you need in order to answer the question. And the second question regarding to this block about risk assessment is, to what extent do you think that this is relevant for community of practice, and you need to build your understanding of those concepts through the activities that we design in this community of practice. And I see we are getting the yearly answers. This is very good. So it seems there is the yearly insight is those aspects are relevant for community of practice, and we should bring into our discussion these. And there is a sort of good familiarity, but probably there are some gaps that we need to fill. I will give it perhaps 30 more seconds for everybody to answer the question. Yeah, this is very useful for us. And feel free also to use the Q&A facility and put there any comments that you might have that you would like to share with us as we are designing this survey. Excellent. I think the survey is stable now. So let's move to the next slide and next type of question that we would like to ask. This is more about investment strategy. So how to fund the activities related to improving your understanding of climate risk and investing into different sources of this information or commissioning it to climate service providers. So there will be certain type of questions about how your organization is allocating funds, where the funds come from, and how do you invest strategically into climate risk assessment, and eventually, how you encourage use and deployment of climate services. The second type of question we would like to ask in this area is also, what are the primary sources of funding? So that might be, I mentioned that CLIMAAX cascading funds, that might be European funds, it might be regional funds raised by taxation or from your planned budget. It might be national grants and so on, or it might be loans and any debt type of instruments. And what is the primary purpose of the investment? Where do you see the critical needs into this? Is it the infrastructure technology? Is it the capacity building and development, the data acquisition, or these type of things? And the purpose for this is really to get a little bit insight and flavor of how you think about investing in climate risk assessment, and also how do you imagine those investment will be covered. And those investment might go into different direction. Might be climate projections which are available for free from the Copernicus Climate Change Service, the forecast or specialized assessment of what the climate risk means for infrastructure systems or something else. So again, we might go to the next slide, and the type of questions is exactly the same, but referred to the investments. So how comfortable do you feel in answering a survey addressing the funding, investment priorities, and the reasons for doing that, and prioritizing also the type of technical or institutional capacity that you need to conduct those risk assessment. And the second part is again, whether you think that this topic should be made a permanent agenda point of our community of practice, and what is the priority that you see as input for us, right? I see we have some answers coming. We have 14 participants that have responded. So this is, just keep it in mind, any type of question that refers to investment into specific areas that you need in order to create the environment and ecosystem that is favorable for improved climate risk assessment and developing and flourishing provision of climate services. And the second one, to what extent we should cover activities dedicated to these during the community of practice. I see we have 18 answers, 19 now. It seems that the average level of the confidence of answering those questions is lower than the first block of question, and this is understandable. And there is also a quite high priority of bringing the topics related to these type of questions to the community of practice. Excellent. I think the survey is stable. We can move to the next one. Next slide. Thank you very much. So this is about challenges and barriers. We would like to learn about, the challenges that you are experiencing by implementing or designing or planning for an improved climate risk assessment, and also funding climate services and risk assessment. So the type of question we will ask is about what are the biggest challenges in implementing risk assessment and the ecosystem of climate services. What are the key barriers to securing funding for those activities and establishing the priorities, and also learning a little bit more about your organization strategy of dealing with those barriers. And then might be a number of those. Again, I pick up an interesting inspirational image from Dragana's work in 2021, and that gives you the flavor of type of awareness raising, co-development activities, or knowledge exchange that is needed in order to overcome those barriers and create a environment that is conducive for this type of intervention. So barriers and challenges, let's go to the survey. Again, the same 2 questions. We are asking about how comfortable do you feel about speaking and answering our question about challenges and barriers, and how important are those topics for this community of practice. So challenges and barriers, just to refresh your memory about designing, implementing, and finding sources for investing into improved climate risk assessment. So for those that have obtained the cascading funds, I think you can refer to how easy is it to oversee the process. Are you using the public procurement or other channels in order to allocate the funds? For those that are wishing to apply, or they have already different strategies how to tap into the funds, available funds from different sources, you might refer to that. And to what extent you would like us to take you and talk you through best practice examples, how to get the funds, how to plan, how to face the issues connected to the implementation. That's the second question. How important is it for you? Fantastic. So we have a stable answer again. The familiarity is a little bit higher compared to the investment strategies, but lower compared to the risk assessment practices. And then we have quite a high level of priority setting for this type of purpose. Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's go to the last slide. And this last slide, last block of question is about future direction and needs. Of course, this is a never-ending targets. As soon as you see a good inspirational example, you probably somehow accommodate those insight into your priorities. So, for example, we have been working with a number of cities to develop a vision and stories of how climate risk influence their activities and daily life in their cities. This is on the example of Milan and heat wave, a very accessible, very nice way of conveying to the people what the risk of heat wave is in the urban context. So the question that we would like to ask in the block related to this category is, what areas of investment should you prioritize for improving the assessment? That might be you need investment into advanced data and tools, capability building, training, stakeholder engagement, or changing the regulatory and policy environment and framework. And also what kind of support you need to create a flourishing market with climate services in your jurisdiction. That might be creating marketplaces, building data spaces, or creating community of practice like this one. Right? So again, your future direction and needs. Let's go to the last slide, and with the last choose question, again, the same kind. How confident do you feel in answering questions related to these? And how important is this topic for the community of practice? Brilliant. So we are getting there. We have already 4 answers. This is very nice. 7 answers. So we are getting there is a high importance attached to this topic, which is very encouraging. Let's wait a little bit about your confidence. It seems that we have a wide range of different backgrounds of the participants. Some of them are very confident, some of them are less. So let's give it 1 more minute. Now it looks very good. Now, thank you. So the purpose of this exercise quickly was helping us to co-design the survey. We will prepare the draft version of the survey for our next community of practice. And that will be presented also with some insight about how cities or regions are developing their strategies, how they're developing their climate risk assessment, and use the result of climate risk assessment for designing adaptation strategy. So there will be a practical examples of different tools outside of the CLIMAAX Toolbox, but we're working on bringing them into the toolbox. And connected to that, we will talk you through and ask you to compile, the questions that I anticipated today. I think this is consistent. We have stable number of answers. So with that, thank you very much, Fulvio, and thank you very much to everybody for helping us to co-design these. And I hand over back to Fulvio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaro, for providing us an overview about the activity, but also the preview of one of the upcoming events that we are planning in the community of practice. So to close, we are perfectly on time. I want to close with a few remarks. First of all, about one upcoming event that is planned in our project, the CLIMAAX Webfestival, which is a two-day digital festival. So you are more than welcome to join us on the 29th and 30th of January to this event, which offers a platform for regions and stakeholders to connect, share experiences, and learn from each others. And this fully online event will provide participants with different type of insights into the achievement of pilot regions, something we already discussed in our meetings within the community of practice, but there will be more space and time to delve into this. And let's say that this will facilitate a collaborative environment also for newly selected regions and others. So you can find the information about this event in the CLIMAAX website under the section News and Events. And second, I would like to leave you with a message on how to engage or stay engaged with our community of practice. First of all, you can join our LinkedIn group. Hopefully, someone will put, yeah, I can see that my colleagues already put the link into the chat, and feel free to join and connect as we will populate this group with resources and promote exchanges on climate risk assessment. And you are more than welcome also to participate to our survey that I mentioned earlier on climate risk assessment practice, as our outcomes will be constantly refined and updated based on different types of inputs and insights we will gather throughout the project. And we are still collecting information on how climate risk assessment is conducted throughout Europe, so you could definitely help us in shaping more and refine more our outcomes. It should take 20 minutes of your time, and this will help us to understand how to support regions in Europe as well in the community of practice. Finally, you can directly subscribe to our community of practice via CLIMAAX website under the section participate and then community of practice. In this way, we will collect your email and use it for sending to you communication and updates. So you have to register, and we will share materials and invitation for future activities. That said, I would like to thank again all of you for joining us today, and a special thanks also to our speakers from the ECWMF and also to our speakers from the pilot regions in Latvia and Finland. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2025. And for those of you celebrating Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas. And also to everyone, a wonderful end of the year and a great start of 2025. So thanks again for joining us, and bye now.